A friend in need is a friend indeed. Genesis chapter 14. Lot is described in the Bible as one who was tormented over their lawless deeds that he saw and heard. 2 Peter chapter 2 verse 7. Yet he never left the wealthy but worldly and wicked city of Sodom and Gomorrah. Previously, Lot chose all the valley of Jordan for its watered spots and scenic views in Genesis chapter 13 verse 10. But it all came to naught when rival kings captured Sodom and Gomorrah and took all the people, including women, their goods, and all their food supply. Genesis chapter 14, verse 11. Abraham, the uncle, risked his life and his household with him to save Lot, the nephew. How are you a blessing to people around you, friends and relatives? Why do we have to take action when people's lives are in disaster, in disarray, or in disrepair? First, sense possible danger. Genesis chapter 14, verses 1 through 10. This chapter features war breaking out on a big scale in the Bible. 4 superior kings in verses 1 against 5 subjected kings in verse 2. One can only imagine the intensity, the intimidation, and the impact of war with 9 kings involved. The 5 kings, including Sodom, in verse 8, rebelled in the 13th year of subjection to Chedorlaomer, but in the 14th year the rebellion was put down in verse 10. Lot and his family had at least a year to leave Sodom, but they lingered. They had time to pack and depart, but they paused and delayed. The 4 kings had grown from strength to strength, crossing mountain, wilderness in verse 6, and regions in verse 7. The rebel kings, however, fought, fell, and fled in verse 10. The optimistic, overconfident, and oblivious Lot saw no risk, no rush, and no reason to run. The verb defeat, smote, in verses 5, 7, 15, and 17 makes its most appearance in a chapter in the book. The slaughter was brutal, beastly, and barbaric. Still, Lot had time to flee, but he was unmoved, unimpressed, and unafraid. The cozy and comfortable surroundings caused him to dull his senses and drop his guard. Second, save people's lives. Genesis chapter 14, verses 11 through 16. Verse 14's called out is rather weak compared to the King James Version's armed. Abram picked 318 men who were competent, combative, and courageous. The noun brother is repeated 5 times in the chapter, in verses 12, twice in 13, 14, and 16. And this chapter has the most pursuit in the Bible. There was nothing Abram would not sacrifice for his nephew Lot, even though anger, animosity, antipathy between the herdsmen of Abram and Lot were not resolved. Abram the master himself went with his servants. Abram's servants were not sent out like stooges, soldiers, and statues. Their lives were precious and priceless. Third, seek proper blessings. Genesis chapter 14, verses 17 through 24. After the fight, Abram gave all the goods to the king of Salem. He was a giver because his God gave. In Genesis chapter 12, verse 7, chapter 13, verse 15, chapter 13, verse 17, him much, from land to seed, from seed to blessing. Second, Abram was more interested in the blessings of God than the benefits from men. The verb bless occurs 3 times, in verse 19 twice, and once in verse 20. While the patriarch gave much more than he took in life, he was the greater beneficiary in more ways than one because his blessing was from God. There is only a reason, Kai, in the text, that his relative had been taken captive in verse 14. In conclusion, are you a neighbor, a friend, and a brother to people in need? How do you treat all men? Men and women, young and old, believing or unbelieving. May the Lord help us all to build relationships, bind wounds, and bless people no matter their race, religion, and reliability.